serious rebelliousness in his heart that was born of jealousy. Beware of thinking that you should be in the position that the other person is. Beware of thinking that you could handle it, or that you deserve it, or that somehow you've been passed by. Jealousy, that's one of the sources of rebellion. Here's another one in verse 4, delusions. Delusions. Notice when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. I mean, he just falls right down on his face. He's just completely devastated by this suggestion. Verse 5, and he said to Korah and to all his company, in the morning the Lord will show who is his. That was a word. We're going to find out who really belongs to God, and who is holy, and who will bring him near to him. The one whom he chooses, he will bring near to him. Do this. Take the censers, Korah and all his company, put fire in them, and put incense on them before the Lord tomorrow. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the holy one. And then he says this really strong thing at the end. You have gone too far, you sons of Eli. And so basically what he's saying to them is, get those censers, get some coals in them. You want to be a priest? You think it's so great being a priest? You want to do what I do? Great. Break out the censers. We're all going to have a big worship service tomorrow, and we'll put little coals in your pan, and we're going to see who really the Lord has called. And then do you see what he calls them? You have gone too far, sons of Levi. That's sarcasm in the Bible right there. Are they sons of Levi? One of them is. Out of 200 to 300 of them, one is. You sons of Levi, you want to be priests? You think this is such a great job? You want to do what I do? Come on, we're going to see who God has chosen and who he hasn't. Wow. I think what he's really trying to say is that they've overstepped their bounds. I wrote down this second source of rebellion, delusions. People just have delusions about themselves. They just think, I can't tell you this, and I just only know how to teach from my own experience, but I can just tell you this. In my own experience, I so often stand at pastors' conferences. I just came back from speaking to 400 pastors in Romania. And I can't tell you how often people call me and say, I want to do what you do. I want to do what you do. And I honestly want to say, which part do you really want to do? Do you want to drive every weekend from 3 years from London down to Windsor, 100 and some miles, and come back exhausted every weekend for $150 a weekend? Is that the part you're excited about? Or I could even go back to the church that I grew up in, working every Friday night, Saturday, all morning to ride a Sunday school bus to learn how to minister to people. Is that the part you're all excited about? Do you want to sell your house and change it all into American money and go down with enough money in your pocket to last you for 3 months and step out by faith and see if maybe God could get you a seminary education? Is that the part you want? Do you want to go to school full-time for 2 years and work full-time for 2 years to graduate and not have a single church anywhere in Canada even interested in you, and find a little group of 18 people who are willing to risk a little bit to start something with you? Do you want to see 12 of the 18 people leave within the first 2 years and break your heart and devastate you, and take 200 people with them and say all kinds of evil, awful things about you? Do you want a person? I could go on like this for 20 minutes. Is that the part you want to do? Usually somewhere in there like, let me get back to you. And I'm just going to tell you, most people have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Like somehow you woke up someday and got to run the company that you're running. Or you woke up someday and got to have the career that you have. Or you woke up someday and got the family that you have. They have absolutely no idea the work and effort that goes into accomplishing the things that God will ultimately do. Everyone wants the result. No one respects the process. People are delusional. And sometimes delusions, like we see here in these men, sometimes delusions are the source of rebellion. I'll never forget when I was particularly perplexed and troubled several years ago about a situation like this. And Dr. Stoll was talking to me on the phone. This was long before he was ever on staff at our church. And he said, James, just mark this down. Truth and time walk hand in hand. That has meant so much to me, that eventually the truth will converge over time with reality. Eventually those things will get together. And they're about to get together in Moses' life. He may have had a couple of nights without sleep here, but time is marching on and truth is converging. Notice this third source of rebellion, starting in verse 9, ungratefulness. Ungratefulness. Moses said in verse 8, and Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it too small a thing for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation and minister to them? In other words, it's not enough what you have. It's not enough what God's given to you. He says in verse 10, and that he has brought you near to him, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you, and would you seek the priesthood also? Therefore, it is against the Lord. That's pretty key there, underline that. That's how God sees rebellion. Therefore, it is against the Lord that you and all your company have gathered together. What is Aaron? And then he just can't believe it. He's like, has God not done enough for you? Has God been a wilderness for you? Have you found that the more that you knew him, the less that you thought of him? Has God disappointed you somehow? Has he broken his promises to you? He's really pounding on a theme that we've hit earlier in our study. It's just how the ungratefulness is fueling their rebelliousness. And they're just ungrateful. They have responsible positions. They have opportunity to serve and work in the various places that God has placed them, some of them even within the context of worship. And then he says this, and what is Aaron that you grumble against him? That sounds like a brother, doesn't it? And he's like, it's one thing to attack me. I know I'm not perfect, but I have no idea exactly why you're picking on my brother. He's got, in other words, back away from my brother. I love that. And what is Aaron that you grumble against him? He just can't believe it. Well, they're just ungrateful for what they have. Look up here for a minute. Could that be a source of rebelliousness in our lives? We want more, we want better, we want different because we don't really appreciate what God's already given to us. I try to remind myself of this all the time. If you have a position of authority, if you have a position of influence, if you have a responsible position in any way, that is a privilege. That is, everyone say it's a privilege. It is a privilege. It is a privilege to be a deacon in a church. It is a privilege to be a small group leader. It is a privilege to be an usher. It is a privilege to be a greeter in a church. It is a privilege to have a responsible position of ministry, some little place to do something in building God's kingdom. Don't ever think it's a right. Treat it as a trust. You've been given a trust. People are counting on you to do what God, I think of that all the time. People are counting on you. When I feel tempted, I think to myself, people are counting on me. Not to blow it, not to disgrace the name of Christ, not to do something foolish in a moment that could forfeit all that's been gained. Remind yourself of that. Be grateful for what God's given you. Ungratefulness can be a source of rebellion. There's three more in the text. The next one is in verse 12. And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. This is unbelievable. And they said, we will not come up. Isn't that amazing? Can you imagine getting a memo from Moses? Moses wants to meet you. Well, I think Toronto has about 2 million people in it. We'll say, suppose you got you live in Toronto, you got a memo from the mayor. He'd like to meet you. Like I care. I'm not going up to talk to him. And here Moses was not just their governmental leader, but he was their spiritual leader. He was the person that God had put in position over them. And he says, I got to meet with you. We got to work this out. We got to talk. And they're like, we're not talking. We're not coming to meet with you. Unbelievable stubbornness. And stubbornness is a source of rebellion. I just don't want to do what people tell me to do. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to be told anything. Do you know the Bible says that rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft? Just so we can put it in its proper context. So, those of you who struggle with rebellion, if you're a person here and you're kind of like, I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like my husband telling me what to do, or I don't like my pastor telling me what to do. I don't like my boss telling me what to do. I don't like the police telling me what to do. I'll give them an earful. Be telling me what to do. I don't like being told what to do. Well, here's how God sees that. It's like witchcraft. So, after you're done rebelling, you might go home into your basement and get out one of those Ouija boards and do something really creepy like that. Or do you know what witchcraft they do? Do you know the creepy things they do in witchcraft? Do you know about all the self-mutilation and the sexual orgies and the bizarre, sick, sacrificial things that they do in witchcraft? Do you know? Because the Bible says that rebellion's like witchcraft. God's like, witches, rebels, witches, rebels. Rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft, and insubordination is like idolatry. A refusal to do what an ordained authority asks you to do is like going over to one of those stores and buying a little Buddha and bringing it home in your house and bowing down to that. You say, that is a sickening thought. Okay, we'll put rebellion in its context. Rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. Insubordination is like idolatry. That's how God sees it. I think we think it's, noble or something. I was in a very, very challenging meeting not so long ago with a fairly well-known Christian leader. And we had a little disagreement, and I had initiated several times a meeting to try to work it out. And we sat down, and let me just say it started very slowly. But as he expressed himself, by God's grace, and because I feel like God has given me a fresh season of brokenness in my life, I was able to say, well, I'm sorry that hurt you, and I'm sorry that you feel that way about that, and I'm sorry that I didn't understand when I made that decision. And boy, the meeting went on for probably an hour and a half, and all of a sudden it just occurred to me, I said, and I used his name, I said, it just occurs to me that we could get further in this effort together if you could locate something that you feel badly about. And just meet me there. And I'm sure as you've been thinking and praying about this, there must be some things that you would do differently. There must be some things that you would want to apologize for. And he said, no, not really. No, I'll think about it. And I left really sad, because it shouldn't be that hard. And I've been at a place like this in my life before. Maybe you have. It just shouldn't be that hard for God to get to us the part that we need to put it back together. And I think a refusal to see what I need to see, it's just stubbornness. God forgive us for our stubbornness. It's a source of rebellion. Two more. Verse 13 and the beginning of verse 14. Another source of rebellion, let's review: jealousy, delusions, ungratefulness, stubbornness. Here's a fifth one: disappointment. Sometimes we're rebellious because we've been disappointed. So notice it says, they called to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, get over here. And they're like, we will not come up. Verse 13. Is it a small thing that you have? So here was the rest of their answer. We're not coming, but we're sending a message, and here it is. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? Did you hear that? How did they describe Egypt? They've taken the words that God used to describe where? The promised land. And now they're using those words to describe Egypt. I can't believe it. And all God's people said, exactly. So, check this out. I'm blown away by that. I forgot how amazing that was. We're not coming. And is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? That you must also make yourself a prince over us? Oh yeah, that's Moses, wearing that crown and that cape all the time. Can't you just see him? To make yourself a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. So I don't know what they're talking about. Last time we checked, if I was Moses, I could say, I lived in Midian, okay? And I came back here to help y'all. When I got here, you made bricks for a living, okay? That's what you did. You were brick makers, okay? You were slaves. And you might have cleaned some pools, but you never swam in any, okay? And you might have cleaned some plates with caviar on them, but you didn't eat any. You would have been in big trouble if you'd get caught doing that. And isn't it interesting how you can distort reality when you're rebellious to make the situation fit with what you are determined to do? I don't get it. I don't get it. Unless maybe they just thought that they'd already be there. And maybe the whole thing is they're just like, well, Moses, you told us you were going to give us a land flowing with milk and honey. You told us we were going to get there. And it's been like a long time, 16 months. I just wrote down, maybe they're just disappointed. Do you think sometimes people rebel because they're disappointed? You follow a leader, you think he's going to give you this and so, and maybe he or she is even trying to give you that. And maybe she wasn't able to accomplish all the things she promised there where you work or where he leads you. And sometimes I think we get disappointed with people. And man, I thought being married to you was going to be a lot better than it is. And I thought you were going to take us places and things were going to happen. And it isn't working out the way we dreamed. And then we get disappointed. And then we use that as an excuse to rebel. Now, is it an excuse to rebel? Tell me, is it an excuse to rebel? No, it really isn't, but they seem to be trying that. And then notice this last one: jealousy, delusions, ungratefulness, stubbornness, disappointment, and then distrust. Distrust. Notice at the end of verse 14, I'll read the whole verse. Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Here it is. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. What does that mean? Will you put out, just take a minute and think about that for yourself. See if you can get it, because I think you will get it. Will you put out the eyes of these men? You're going to poke their eyes out? You're going to make us all blind? Like all the people that follow you, Moses? Everyone who follows you is blind. They're just blind. All your yes men, Moses. Those guys with the white hats. You just do whatever you say, Moses, your little crew. They're blind to your faults. We see your faults. But they're blind. We're not coming up there, Moses. You're going to try to make us blind. That's what he's saying. You're going to poke our eyes out too? Make us blind like all those followers of yours, just following you everywhere they go? Of course, that's what a rebel always says. I'm upset. I don't want to follow you. Don't mess me up with the facts. I'm not meeting with you. I'm not coming up to talk to you. I don't want my mind changed. And that's what they're saying. It's distrust. And they just totally don't trust the leader. One of the sources of rebellion is distrust. And you're going to have, maybe someone's broken your trust. Maybe you have a hard time trusting. Maybe someone had your trust and they wounded you and disappointed you. And now you say, I'm not going to put myself in that position again. I'm not going to get hurt by people like I did before. I'm not going to trust anybody. And you have become very, very hard to lead. All right? It's rebellion. And it is a wilderness attitude. And it doesn't take us anywhere very good. You say, where does it take us? Well, that's the last section, verses 15 through 48. Rebellion has many consequences. Notice, first of all, starting in verse 15, and Numbers 16:15. And Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them. I love that. And I have not harmed one of them. That's how a leader feels. He's like, this is what I get? I'm taking nothing from these people. And Moses said to Korah, be present, you and all your company, before the Lord, you and they and Aaron tomorrow. And let every one of you take a censer and put incense in it. Every one of you bring before the Lord his censer. 250, you also, and Aaron each his censer. So every man took a censer, put fire in them, and laid incense on them. So the coals are inside, and then the aroma creating stuff is on the outside. And they stood at the entrance of the tent of the meeting with Moses and Aaron. Then Korah assembled all the congregation against them. This Korah, this bald guy, he's in trouble. He gets all the congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. That's their tabernacle, their church. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may, in other words, stand back. Step away from the vehicle. All right? Separate yourselves from this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces and said, this is Moses and Aaron. And they said, oh God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you'll be angry with all the congregation? In other words, God, don't take everybody out just because of their sin. Notice this. A number one consequence of rebellion is leadership withdrawal. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the congregation, get away from the dwelling of Korah. God says, all right, I won't wipe them all out. They can die over the next couple of decades. But as for these guys, they're going down right now. So get away from those 3 guys' tents. And I could just tell you this from experience. One of the worst things that happens to the rebellious person is that the leadership that they desperately need separates themselves from them. They're just like, you think that's so great? You want that? Have it. And they just back away. I can tell you, in our church, the people that are hardest to lead, they don't get led. They just have their little circle of rebelliousness. They just fight and struggle and battle, but you just kind of step away from them. And I think it was Bill Gothard who I first heard teach that God gives us authority like an umbrella. You've probably heard this analogy. And God's authority over us is like an umbrella. And when you are under the umbrella of authority, under the government, under your parents, under your pastor in your church, and the elders of your church or the leaders of your church, you're under authority. And that's a place of protection for you. I wonder how many high school students we have here. High school students, let me see your hands if you're a high school student you're here. Excellent. Stand up for a minute. All high school students standing, please. All right? And let me just speak something. I think it's so awesome that y'all are in the front. And I just think it says something about your heart that you just hear with such teachable attitudes. But I just want you to hear it from me, all right? God gave you your parents as a protection. All right? And you might not be able to see everything that they see. You might not be able to understand everything they understand. And you might have already figured out that they're not perfect. But I'm going to tell you the safest place in the universe for you is under the authority of your parents. Whether you feel it or don't, whether you see it or don't, you could go out of this place tonight and you could make a choice in the next 2 days that could devastate you for a lifetime. And your parents are fighting, trying to help you get to a level of maturity where you'll be able to see that for yourself. But if you're determined, if you're absolutely determined, you get yourself out from under the protection that God himself has appointed over you, and things will not go well for you. So as hard as it is, and I know you're trying to find your own way, and they want you to ultimately, stay under the authority, the umbrella of protection that God has given you, and life will go a lot better for you. Am I speaking truth? Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. All right? Now, what those kids got to hear, there's a lot of people here that desperately wish they could have heard that when they were in that place. Pastor James, if I could go back to that time in my life and have somebody tell me what you just told them, if I could have somehow heard that and not made some of the choices that I made, my life could be so much different. And it is a tragic thing when people either pull back or leadership. I'm telling you, when there's a separation between you and the authority that God has established over you, that puts your life significantly at risk. That's one of the consequences. That's what's happening right here. Step away from the tents. Here it comes. Under the consequences of rebellion, then leadership withdrawal. And notice this second thing, innocence defiled, starting in verse 25. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, these guys, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins. So they got away from the dwelling of Korah and Dathan and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents. Look at this, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. That means their grandchildren. So the parents, the children, and the grandchildren, all there together. The wives, their sons, and their little ones. There's a tragic picture of the children standing there at the door of the tent. It's a very, very tragic picture of the grandchildren standing there at the door of the tent. And in just a moment, the ground's going to open up and swallow them all. One of the things I think we fail to see is how clearly the Bible teaches that the sins of the parents are visited upon the children to the third and fourth generation. I'll tell you something, fathers, I won't have you stand, but you listen to me. You can make a choice that can devastate your family for generations to come. You think all that's at stake is your little pleasure in the next 15 minutes? You think that's all that's on the line? Don't you understand that the choices that we make affect everyone in our family? What a clear biblical teaching this is. You want to rebel against God? You want to go your own way? You think you're just making that decision for yourself? You're going to pull a lot of people down into hell with you who are going to think that the faith that you previously espoused is just a joke. It's just a mockery. Look what Dad did. He was never serious. The whole thing they taught us was a farce, and people don't recover for a lifetime, even unto the next and the generation after that, because of the rebellious choices that people make. Innocent people defiled by the rebelliousness of someone else. God help us. Notice this third consequence. Leadership withdrawal, innocence defiled, guilty condemned. Starting in verse 28, the text continues. And Moses said, hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. Here it is. If these men die as all men die, or if they're visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord. Who did they despise? You're like, I thought they were kind of into God. It was Moses that they despised. When you despise the authority that God has placed over you, you are despising God himself. That these men have despised the Lord. And as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they, and all that they belonged to them, went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were holding those censers. All of them. Incredible consequences. Verse 36. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, to take up the censers out of the blaze. So the fire comes down and the people are consumed.